The Bloodline of Gold, the unbelievable true story of the Medici dynasty. The 6.5 Quadrillion Dynasty. Imagine a single family whose wealth, if adjusted to today's standards, would be an unimaginable $6.5 quadrillion. That's not a typo. That's more than the entire global GDP right now. Forget the Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds. Before they were even a glimmer in history's eye, there was the Medici. They didn't just bankroll the Renaissance, they essentially invented the modern world. They funded Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, brought democracy to heel, and installed 3 of their own as popes, the supreme power of the era. But their real genius, the secret that built that unthinkable fortune, wasn't art or piety. It was war. They were the world's first true arms financiers, loaning millions to kings and emperors to wage brutal campaigns, and then collecting the entire nation as collateral. They were the ultimate power brokers, controlling all the rich families through debt and alliances. This is the true story of how a small-time family of wool merchants built an empire of gold and blood, an empire so vast it would one day crumble into the ultimate heartbreaking tragedy. Their history is the blueprint for how money, power, and war still run the world, a blueprint drawn in the heart of Renaissance Florence. The story begins not with a pope or a prince, but with a humble man, a brilliant, cautious banker who understood one eternal truth. If you control the money that pays the army, you control the man who wears the crown. So if you love stories where history feels alive, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell, because the next chapter is even darker.
The Architect of Shadows, Giovanni de' Medici, 1360 to 1429. The birth of the war financier. The year is 1397. Florence is a ruthless, vibrant republic, but one struggling to shed its medieval skin. The old banking families, the Bardi and the Peruzzi, had been wiped out after disastrously lending huge sums to the King of England for his endless wars, only for the king to default. The financial world was a graveyard of ambition. Enter Giovanni de' Medici. A man of cautious brilliance, Giovanni was unlike the flamboyant nobles who sought glory in the battlefield. He sought glory in the ledger. He founded the Medici Bank in Florence, and it would become the single most powerful financial institution in Europe for the next century. Giovanni's genius was twofold, both intrinsically tied to conflict. The papal account, the ultimate weapon. His masterstroke was securing the exclusive rights to manage the finances of the papacy, the Catholic Church. This was the ultimate account. The Church controlled the flow of tithes and donations from every Christian kingdom in Europe, a massive, consistent stream of wealth. The Pope is the greatest spiritual authority, but he is also the wealthiest, most extensive multinational corporation in the world. Giovanni managed the cash flow for the entire operation. It was like holding the ATM card for God. This relationship granted the Medici 2 crucial powers. Massive liquidity. The papal treasury guaranteed the bank a constant, enormous source of funds to lend out. And political immunity. Who would dare attack or default on the Pope's banker? The Medici were untouchable, their operation sanctioned by the highest spiritual power. The war bonds and debt trap diplomacy. The 14th century was a century of constant warfare. City-states fought city-states, Florence versus Milan, and kings fought kings, France versus England. Giovanni saw not destruction, but a massive market opportunity. Kings and dukes needed huge, immediate sums of cash to hire mercenaries, buy cannons, and provision armies. They couldn't wait for taxes to be collected. They went to the Medici Bank. The Medici didn't just offer loans, they offered war financing. They funded the mercenary armies that did the actual fighting, ensuring their clients had the best soldiers. They used a clever system of branch banks in Rome, Venice, Geneva, London, and Bruges, which were essentially separate partnerships. If a high-risk loan to, say, the Duke of Burgundy for his campaign went bad, that local branch would collapse, but the main bank in Florence and the family's overall fortune remained safe. This was a revolutionary risk management strategy. Giovanni's profit was literally built on the backs of fallen soldiers. As kingdoms plunged into debt to feed their war machines, the Medici would take collateral in the form of tax revenues, valuable land, or even the right to control the local currency. This is how they began to control the rich families, by controlling the governments those rich families relied upon. By becoming the creditor of the king, the Medici had silent leverage over every noble and merchant who traded or held an office under that king. They controlled the purse strings of the entire power structure. The hidden ruler of Florence. Giovanni was a master of the shadow game. He never sought an official title like prince or duke. He knew that visible power drew daggers. His motto was to be a first citizen, a man of the people who pulled strings from the shadows. He used his colossal, war-gained fortune for calculated public patronage. He paid for new churches and hospitals, earning the love of the common people, il popolo. He strategically paid the outstanding taxes of his political allies, ensuring their loyalty and compliance in the city council, the signoria. When Giovanni died in 1429, he left behind not a title, but a quiet, formidable truth. His family was no longer merely wealthy. They were the unspoken rulers of Florence and the secret financiers of Europe's conflicts. He had handed his son Cosimo a financial machine whose engine ran on the fuel of war. The father of the country, Cosimo de' Medici, 1389 to 1464. Exile, the banker's gambit, power through exile and return. Cosimo de' Medici, Giovanni's son, inherited the largest private bank in Europe, but he also inherited the precarious position of being an uncrowned king. He was not satisfied with being the shadow ruler. He wanted absolute control, yet still refused the title of duke. His brilliance lay in using his immense wealth and the leverage that came with his war-financing empire to achieve this control in a manner that seemed democratic. In 1433, Florence's traditional noble families, led by the Albizzi, grew terrified of Cosimo's power. They fabricated charges against him and had him arrested and swiftly exiled from the city. This was meant to be the end of the Medici. It was, instead, the ultimate financial masterstroke. The power of debt. As soon as Cosimo stepped outside Florence's gates, the economic clock stopped. The vast majority of the city's powerful merchants and politicians owed money to the Medici Bank. The church's funds were now managed from Venice, where Cosimo had relocated. Florence's international finance dried up overnight. Trade ceased. The tax collection systems that the Medici had optimized ground to a halt. Without the Medici machinery to finance Florence's foreign policy and trade, the city quickly sank into an economic abyss. The powerful elite who had engineered his exile suddenly realized they had imprisoned the very circulation system of the Republic. Less than a year later, in 1434, the tide of popular and elite opinion had swung so violently that the Albizzi were exiled and Cosimo was brought back in triumph. He returned not just as a banker, but as the undisputed master of Florence. The city, grateful and desperate, bestowed upon him the unofficial title Pater Patriae, father of the country. Funding the battles, owning the victors, the wars of Lombardy. Cosimo's true genius in generating wealth through conflict was during the devastating Wars of Lombardy, around 1423 to 1454, a continuous struggle for supremacy between Florence, Milan, and Venice. While Florence nominally fought against Milan, Cosimo played a far more complex game that guaranteed Medici profit regardless of who won the battle. The Florentine treasury. As the unofficial head of the state, Cosimo ensured that all war expenditures for Florence flowed through his bank, charging interest and fees on every mercenary payroll and cannon purchase. The Milanese debt. More astonishingly, historians believe the Medici Bank also funded Florence's enemies, like the Dukes of Milan, through their various discrete European branch banks. This ensured that both sides of the conflict were financially dependent on the Medici. Controlling the condottieri, or mercenary captains. The wars were fought by private armies. The most famous mercenary leader of the time, Francesco Sforza, was crucial. Cosimo shrewdly backed Sforza, financing his rise to power. When Sforza successfully seized Milan and became its duke in 1450, it was a massive political coup for Cosimo. He now had a powerful, debt-bound ally controlling his city's greatest rival. The Medici strategy. The objective was never to achieve a swift victory for Florence, but to maintain a balance of power, a state of controlled, prolonged tension that necessitated continuous borrowing and spending from all parties. War was their most profitable product. The longer the struggle, the greater the accumulation of interest and collateral for the Medici Bank. This strategic financial dominance over the entire Italian peninsula meant that every noble family, from the Visconti in Milan to the Orsini in Rome, was either a client, a debtor, or a dependent of the Medici financial machine. Cosimo controlled the elite because he controlled their liquidity. Art, the ultimate public relations, weaponizing the Renaissance. Cosimo understood that to solidify his control, a control gained through ruthlessness and financial manipulation, he needed a layer of irresistible legitimacy. His solution was the Renaissance. He poured his war profits into art, architecture, and scholarship, not just because he loved beauty, but because it was the ultimate PR campaign. He commissioned Filippo Brunelleschi to finish the iconic Duomo Dome, giving Florence a symbol of impossible grandeur. He founded the Medici Library, collecting ancient texts and making Florence the intellectual center of Europe. He became the patron of brilliant minds like Donatello. This patronage transformed the Medici from mere moneylenders into cultural saviors. They were no longer seen as the family who profiteered from war. They were the family who brought divine beauty and light to the world. This made the people adore them and made the international elite eager to be associated with them. When Cosimo died, he had established a political system that was functionally a kleptocracy, ruled by hidden financial power. He had built the foundation for his family's peak, ensuring his grandson would inherit the greatest power the world had yet seen.
The magnificent banker, Lorenzo de' Medici, 1449 to 1492. The Golden Age, Power and Peril. Lorenzo, Cosimo's grandson, inherited the Medici Empire at its absolute peak. He was the perfect Renaissance prince, a brilliant poet, a scholar, an astute diplomat, and a ruthless politician. History remembers him as Lorenzo il Magnifico, Lorenzo the Magnificent.
He continued his grandfather's strategy of weaponizing art and culture as a distraction. He poured money into commissions for young talents like Michelangelo and Botticelli, making Florence the undeniable jewel of the Western world. This cultural sheen was essential, as it masked a deepening crisis within the family's financial engine. By Lorenzo's time, the sheer scale of the Medici bank's operations, especially the risky, high-interest loans funding various European wars, had made the entire system unstable. Lorenzo, a brilliant statesman but a mediocre banker, started using the bank's liquid funds, including the sacred papal accounts, to cover his political maneuvers and personal expenses. The war strategy evolved. Instead of simply financing both sides, Lorenzo sought to be the indispensable mediator. He personally brokered the Peace of Lodi, 1454, and maintained a precarious policy of balance among the 5 great Italian states: Florence, Milan, Venice, Naples, and the Papal States. This meant that he wasn't just profiting from the wars, he was managing their start and stop times, making him the most crucial and most envied man in Italy. The Pazzi Conspiracy, 1478, Blood on the Altar. Lorenzo's absolute control over Florence and his strategic manipulation of the balance of power made him a target of the most powerful rival forces. The Pazzi family, a rival Florentine banking dynasty, and Pope Sixtus IV, who resented the Medici control over papal finances. The conspiracy was breathtaking in its audacity. The plotters, backed by the Pope and his nephew, decided to eliminate both Lorenzo and his younger brother, Giuliano, during High Mass on Easter Sunday in the Florence Cathedral, the Duomo. They chose the holiest moment, the elevation of the host, for the assassination. The tragedy, on April 26, 1478, the plot was executed. While standing at the altar, Giuliano de' Medici was attacked and brutally stabbed 19 times by 2 priests, dying on the marble floor of the church. Lorenzo was attacked, but managed to fight off his assailants, drawing his sword and escaping into the sacristy, while his friends barricaded the bronze doors. The conspiracy was a catastrophic failure for the plotters. The people of Florence, loyal to the family that had brought them the Renaissance, rose up in a terrifying spasm of violence. They dragged the conspirators, including the Archbishop of Pisa and the head of the Pazzi family, from their hiding places. The Medici exacted a merciless public revenge. The conspirators were hanged from the windows of the Palazzo della Signoria, Florence's town hall, in a brutal spectacle. This event transformed the Medici. They had been near absolute rulers before. Now they were avengers. They purged every last trace of their opponents. Lorenzo's control over Florence was now absolute and enforced by terror. The Papal War. Survival through sheer audacity. The Pazzi conspiracy plunged Florence into a devastating direct war with the Papal States and their ally, the Kingdom of Naples. Pope Sixtus IV declared Lorenzo an outlaw, excommunicated the entire city of Florence, and launched a massive military campaign. The Medici-funded Florentine army suffered crushing defeats. The papal forces were relentless. The city was facing economic ruin, military defeat, and spiritual damnation. In a move of staggering courage and desperation, Lorenzo did the unthinkable. he secretly sailed to Naples, the home of his most dangerous enemy, King Ferrante, to negotiate peace personally. The negotiation, Lorenzo didn't plead. He used the family's greatest weapon, financial and geopolitical leverage. He argued that if Naples and the Pope destroyed Florence, it would upset the entire balance of power in Italy, inviting dangerous intervention from France or Spain. He essentially blackmailed the king with the threat of international chaos. The victory? King Ferrante, recognizing the truth of Lorenzo's assessment and perhaps charmed by his magnificent persona, agreed to peace terms against the Pope's wishes. Lorenzo returned to Florence a hero, having survived assassination, stared down a pope, and turned a losing war into a diplomatic triumph. He was now the undisputed anchor of Italy's political system. The financial rot, the family's ultimate self-sabotage. Despite the political triumphs, the Medici bank was dying. Lorenzo's constant use of the bank as his private political treasury, combined with enormous bad loans, such as funding King Edward IV of England's campaigns, only to have the loan default, led to the collapse of the London, Bruges, and Milan branches. Lorenzo died in 1492, at the age of 43, exhausted and burdened by the knowledge that the financial foundation built by Giovanni and Cosimo was crumbling. He left his son, Piero, a magnificent but financially hollow shell of an empire. His tragedy was this: he secured absolute political power and achieved eternal cultural glory, but he did so by destroying the instrument, the bank, that had made it all possible.
The Great Collapse, Piero the Unfortunate, and the Bonfire of the Vanities, 1492 to 1498. The Inheritor of Ruin, Piero de' Medici. Lorenzo the Magnificent died in 1492, the same year Columbus sailed to America, and Italy's political landscape instantly began to shift. He left his eldest son, Piero di Lorenzo de' Medici, often dubbed Piero the Unfortunate, in charge. Piero was handsome, athletic, and arrogant, lacking his father's political shrewdness and his grandfather's financial discipline. The control the Medici held over all the rich families and city-states was entirely predicated on the genius of their financial strategy and the deftness of their diplomacy. Piero was prepared for neither. Lorenzo's system of maintaining a balance of power in Italy relied on Florence never appearing too weak. But in 1494, a massive external threat arose that exposed the fragility of the Medici's control. King Charles VIII of France marched a huge modern army of 25,000 men over the Alps and into Italy, intending to claim the Kingdom of Naples. The French Invasion and the Fall of Florence, 1494. The French invasion was the ultimate test of the Medici system of control through debt and alliance. Piero failed spectacularly. King Charles VIII, with his formidable force, reached the borders of Florentine territory. Instead of mustering the state's resources and alliances, many of which were debt-bound to the family, Piero panicked. He met the French king, and in a shocking move that mirrored the appeasement of a defeated enemy, personally handed over control of key Florentine fortresses and strategic ports. This was a catastrophic diplomatic and military surrender done without consulting the city council. The betrayal. For a century, the Medici had projected an image of invincible power earned through ruthlessness and strategic funding of wars. Piero's cowardice instantly shattered this illusion. The people of Florence, who had loved the Medici for their glory and protection, suddenly saw them as traitors who had surrendered the Republic's sovereignty. The moment the French troops occupied the city's coastal towns, Florence erupted. The people, tired of the Medici's thinly veiled dictatorship, rose up. On November 9, 1494, the mob stormed the Palazzo Medici, and Piero, along with his entire family, was forced to flee for his life. The Medici dynasty, built over a century of financial manipulation and war profiteering, collapsed in a single day. Their properties were ransacked, their wealth seized, and the Republic was declared restored. The Reign of Terror. Girolamo Savonarola. With the Medici gone, a new ruler took control of Florence, Girolamo Savonarola, a radical Dominican friar. Savonarola preached that the French invasion and the Medici downfall were divine retribution for Florence's sins, its moral corruption, its obsession with classical paganism, and its pursuit of luxurious wealth, the very Renaissance culture that Lorenzo had so brilliantly promoted. Savonarola established a terrifying theocracy. His puritanical rule targeted the entire wealthy elite and the culture the Medici had established. The Bonfire of the Vanities, 1997. Savonarola's followers, the Piagnoni, weepers, organized massive public burnings. They collected the symbols of Medici-era decadence, luxury clothing, makeup, mirrors, playing cards, expensive books, and most tragically, priceless works of art painted by Botticelli, Michelangelo's teacher. The wealth and culture the Medici had spent war profits on was literally sent up in smoke. Control of the elite. Savonarola's regime terrorized the rich families. Any hint of luxury or opposition was met with the threat of excommunication and death. The city's atmosphere was dominated by spies, denunciations, and religious zealotry. The elite who had once bowed to Medici money were now forced to live in stark religious austerity. Savonarola's revolution was the ultimate rejection of the Medici's Gilded Age. The Seeds of Return, the last Medici heirs. While Savonarola purged Florence, the surviving Medici heirs, Piero and his younger brothers Giovanni and Giuliano, were in exile, licking their wounds. It was the youngest brother, Giovanni, who would later become Pope Leo X, who realized that political power must now be sought not in the Florentine banking hall, but in the ultimate seat of authority, Rome. Giovanni, a clever cardinal, began building alliances with key European powers, reminding them that the return of the Medici would stabilize Italian politics and, crucially, reopen the lucrative papal bank account. Savonarola's extreme rule eventually alienated the Pope and the Florentine elite. In 1498, just 4 years after the Medici fled, Savonarola was captured, tortured, hanged, and his body burned in the Piazza della Signora, the very spot where Lorenzo had hanged the Pazzi conspirators. The stage was now set for a struggle of titanic proportions. The exiled Medici, financially ruined but politically ambitious, versus a Florentine republic desperate to maintain its freedom. The Popes of Profit, the Medici returned to power, 1512 to 1537. The Iron Fist, the brutal return. After 18 years in exile, the Medici returned, not as cautious bankers, but as agents of ruthless papal power. The pivotal moment came in 1512. The new pope, Julius II, the warrior pope, wanted to rid Italy of the French influence. The exiled Medici brother Giovanni allied with Julius and the Spanish. This alliance culminated in the Battle of Ravenna, 1512. Though a tactical French victory, the Spanish forces ultimately succeeded in pushing the French out of the peninsula. Seizing the opportunity, a Spanish army, backed by Medici funds and influence, marched on Florence.
The Republic refused to take the Medici back peacefully. The Spanish, therefore, brutally sacked the nearby town of Prato, massacring thousands to send a terrifying message. The fear was immediate and total. The Florentine government instantly surrendered. The Medici walked back into Florence not as invited guests, but as conquerors, escorted by foreign troops. They immediately abolished the Republic, purged their enemies, and established a true, undisputed dictatorship over the city. The ultimate coup, a Medici Pope. The crowning achievement of the Medici power strategy came in 1513, just a year after their violent return to Florence. Cardinal Giovanni de' Medici, Lorenzo the Magnificent's son, was elected pope. He took the name Pope Leo X. This was the ultimate consolidation of power and wealth. The family that had started as the Pope's banker now controlled the papacy itself. Financial control. The vast wealth, political power, and endless revenue stream of the entire Catholic Church were now at the Medici family's disposal. The family's personal treasury and the papal treasury became, for all intents and purposes, one. Waging war with God's authority. Leo X and his successor, Pope Clement VII, Giulio de' Medici, the illegitimate son of Lorenzo's assassinated brother Giuliano, used the spiritual authority of the Church to wage geopolitical war and generate wealth. Indulgences. They intensified the sale of indulgences, certificates that promised forgiveness of sins, to raise massive amounts of cash. This money was ostensibly used to fund the rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica, but a significant portion flowed into Medici coffers and funded their political and military campaigns across Italy. Military expeditions. Leo X launched numerous wars of expansion, using papal armies to carve out territories for his relatives and secure the family's dominance. He made his cousin, Giulio, an archbishop and trusted military commander, leveraging the Church's vast resources for purely dynastic gain. The ultimate tragedy of the Catholic Church in this period was its complete subservience to the Medici family's ambition for power and profit through conflict. This abuse of power, financed by the sale of salvation, was the direct catalyst for the Protestant Reformation in Germany, led by Martin Luther, a schism that would shatter the unity of Europe and plunge the continent into decades of bloody religious wars. The Shield with Consequence. The Siege of Florence, 1529 to 1530. The high point of Medici power was met with its lowest point of tragedy. In 1527, during the tumultuous wars between France and the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, Pope Clement VII made a grave political miscalculation, abandoning the emperor to side with France. The Emperor Charles V retaliated by sending his unruly, massive army of German and Spanish mercenaries, the Landsknechts, to Rome. The ensuing sack of Rome 1527 was one of the most brutal events in history. Pope Clement VII was captured and imprisoned in the Castel Angelo. Seeing the Pope, their ultimate protector, imprisoned and the city of Rome decimated, the Florentines once again revolted against Medici rule, driving out the last of the family members and declaring the Republic restored. This set the stage for the final, tragic confrontation. The Siege of Florence, 1529 to 1530. The captured Pope Clement VII made a desperate deal with the emperor. He would crown Charles V as the Holy Roman Emperor in exchange for the emperor using his immense military power to crush the Florentine Republic and restore the Medici permanently. The imperial army, one of the largest and most professional in Europe, surrounded Florence. The Florentines, knowing this was their last stand for freedom, resisted heroically for 11 months. The cost of control. The city's defenses were organized by Michelangelo, who briefly turned from art to military engineering. The Florentines fought with astonishing courage, fueled by a profound hatred of the Pope and the return of the family who used them for profit. But their resistance was ultimately doomed. In August 1530, the city fell.
Clement VII, the Medici Pope, had used the combined might of the Papal State and the Holy Roman Empire to unleash a terrible military force on his own city. The subsequent purge of the Republic's supporters was unforgiving. The Medici were back, now placed upon the throne by the absolute power of the Holy Roman Empire. The end of the Republic, Alessandro and the inheritance of power. Pope Clement VII, having destroyed the Republic, installed his young, brutal, and widely hated illegitimate son Alessandro da Medici as the city's first duke. This formally ended the Florentine Republic, and the Medici transitioned from shadow bankers to acknowledged royalty. The family had successfully navigated centuries of conspiracy, war, and collapse. They had lost their bank, but they had won the ultimate prize: undisputed, hereditary, and absolute control. But this victory was built entirely on blood, betrayal, and the crushing of the people's liberty. Their tragedy was sealed by the very means of their success. The twilight of the dynasty. Absolute power, absolute ruin. 1537 to 1737. The price of absolute rule. Alessandro's brutal end. The installation of Alessandro de' Medici as the first Duke of Florence in 1530 marked the complete transformation of the family. They were no longer the first citizens operating in the shadows. They were European despots, ruling a cowed city with the backing of the emperor. Alessandro's rule was short, brutal, and debauched. His reign was characterized by unchecked tyranny and excess, further alienating the Florentine elite and the common people. The ultimate betrayal. Alessandro's rule was ended in the most shocking family betrayal. In 1537, his young cousin and closest companion, Lorenzino de' Medici, often called Lorenzaccio or Bad Lorenzo, lured the Duke to a private assignation with a woman. Instead, Lorenzino had plotted an assassination. He stabbed Alessandro to death, declaring he had done so to free Florence from tyranny and restore the Republic. Lorenzino's dream of freedom was fleeting. The wealthy elite, terrified of a popular uprising and knowing the imperial might would crush any restored republic, immediately installed a new, distant, but highly capable Medici relative, Cosimo I de' Medici. Cosimo I, the architect of the Grand Duchy and financial innovation. Cosimo I, 19 to 1574, was the final great genius of the dynasty. He understood that the old model, a volatile banking empire, was dead. He created a new state based on consolidated military power, bureaucratic efficiency, and a complete monopoly on wealth generation. He moved the family's wealth generation away from risky private banking and into the power of the state itself. State monopoly and taxation. Cosimo established state monopolies on essential goods like salt and tobacco, ensuring the government, the Medici, controlled all profits. He perfected a ruthless and comprehensive system of taxation, forcing the populace and all rich families to fund his massive state apparatus. The rise of the galleys. He focused heavily on building a powerful navy and creating the Order of St. Stephen, a state-sponsored military religious order. This fleet was used to fight the Ottoman Turks in the Mediterranean, but more importantly, it was used for state-sanctioned piracy and privateering. This conflict-driven wealth generation became a key source of Medici income, cementing their position as a power whose wealth was still inextricably linked to war and military ventures. Control over the elite, the final form. Under Cosimo, the rich families could no longer be clients or debtors of the Medici Bank. They were now servants of the Medici state. They were required to hold court positions, participate in the state bureaucracy, and purchase noble titles, tying their financial well-being and social status directly to the absolute authority of the Grand Duke. Disobedience meant financial ruin and political execution. In 1569, Cosimo was crowned Grand Duke of Tuscany by the Pope, giving the Medici family a permanent, recognized royal title. They had achieved ultimate authority, transforming their city-state into a hereditary monarchy. Rose. The Slow Extinction. The Final Medici, 1600s to 1737. The next 100 years saw the gradual, tragic decline of the dynasty. The later Grand Dukes lacked the genius, ruthlessness, or ambition of the early founders. They ruled a stable, wealthy state, but their creativity and hunger for power waned. They were more interested in hunting, religious devotion, and accumulating art than in geopolitical maneuvering or financial innovation. The Medici line runs dry. The dynasty was plagued by an inability to produce male heirs. The family line became thin and sickly, a haunting biological tragedy for a family so focused on securing its lineage. The European powers had long ago agreed to partition Tuscany. The Medici's vast territories and unimaginable wealth were simply handed over to the House of Lorraine, Habsburgs. The last true Medici, Anna Maria Luisa de Medici, Gian Gaston's sister, signed one final document before the foreign rulers took over. It was an act of profound patriotism and eternal defiance. The Family Pact, 1737. Anna Maria Luisa stipulated that the vast, breathtaking, war-gained cultural wealth of the Medici, the paintings, the statues, the palaces, the libraries, the jewels, the accumulated treasures of the Renaissance, must never leave Florence. They were to be the permanent patrimony of the city, for the benefit of all nations and to attract foreigners. It was a final, stunning act of public relations. She guaranteed that though the Medici name would die, their legacy and influence would live forever. The ultimate tragedy. The family died out, but their ghosts, the countless masterpieces they commissioned, now guarantee Florence's immortality. Implosion and the enduring legacy. Still now. The story of the Medici is a profound historical tragedy, not just because they died out, but because the system they perfected never did. The system that still rules: war, debt, and the global elite. You asked, how does this family fully control all of the rich people on that time, and still now? The Medici didn't just invent double-entry bookkeeping. They invented the modern architecture of financial control, which is fundamentally based on two principles: conflict as asset generation. The early Medici understood that the state's need for immediate funding during conflict is the single most lucrative moment for a private financier. Modern investment banks operate on this principle, financing and managing sovereign debt, national debt. Whether it's the funding of military R&D, reconstruction contracts after conflict, or managing the vast national debt incurred by war, the model of profit through conflict is a Medici invention. Controlling the elite through debt and liquidity. The rich families of the Renaissance were forced into dependence on the Medici Bank or the Medici state. Today, the global elite, the wealthiest 1%, are controlled not by one family, but by the interconnected global financial system that is fundamentally a web of debt, credit, and investment. The institutions that control the liquidity, the flow of cash and credit, for governments and major corporations, ultimately exert the kind of silent, non-titled power that Cosimo de' Medici pioneered. The Medici story is the chilling, true origin story of the global finance model. A centralized entity uses war and debt to consolidate power, controls the reigning political authority, the popes, the kings, and forces the surrounding rich elite into dependence, while using culture and art as a magnificent distraction. The thrilling, tragic conclusion. The Grand Duke Gian Gaston de' Medici died in his opulent palace in 1737, a solitary, broken man, the last of his kind. As the foreign dignitaries prepared to take over his throne and his wealth, the last connection to the old powerful lineage was severed. The most powerful dynasty the world had ever seen, the one that shaped a continent and defined an age, vanished not with a bang, but with a whisper. Today, in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, you can walk past the unimaginable treasures they accumulated, the art, the beauty, the gold, all paid for with the interest earned on the blood-soaked loans that financed the Italian wars. The true tragedy of the Medici is that they achieved everything they ever sought: absolute power, eternal fame, and control over their world. But in securing it, they destroyed the free republic they pretended to serve, bankrupted the business that started it all, and, ultimately, by embracing the dark side of ambition, they sacrificed the vitality of their own bloodline, leaving behind only the cold, glorious monuments of their passing. They won the game of power, but they lost their future. And we, the audience, are left in a world still governed by the financial rules they ruthlessly wrote, a world where art and wealth often hide the ugly reality of the war machine that funds it all.